touch this. Can't touch this. Can't touch this. Can't touch this. Break it down.
Hello and welcome to Hammerheads, or Hammerheads, to say it in a slightly less unusual way, podcast. This is Miles Watts, and this is my co-host, Marcus Wilson.
Hello.
Or co-host, as they say, if you're not from Huddersfield or surrounding area. This is our 11th show, 12th show?
It's 11th, I think, yes.
11th show in about 17, I think, initially, because we are going through the BFI's list of 17 excellent Hammer horror films from the year 1957 to 1974, because they did a great list a few years ago, which was just a film a year from all of their years when they were putting out movies. And we've so far covered, I think, 10 of those movies.
Indeed we have, and it's been quite the ride.
It has. Last time, if you haven't listened to the show before, we covered Plague of the Zombies from 1966. And this week, we've got something very different, actually, from all of the other Hammer films we've watched to date. And that is 1967's Quatermass and the Pit.
Yes, or as it was released in the US, 5 Million Years to Earth, I think it was called in the US.
That's not as good a title, is it?
No, it's not. It doesn't really, it's not very catchy.
No. And I've watched this movie today, as often is often the case. I like to have it fresh in my mind just before the podcast. And it's the third cinematic adaptation of Nigel Neal's Quatermass stories.
Yes, correct. Because Hammer did a couple before this in the 50s, didn't they?
They did. And in fact, I remember my dad watching the Quatermass Experiment, the 1950s version, with Gordon Jackson as the poor, helpless sod who gets turned into a plant, basically. And it used to really freak me out because I used to come in, Dad would be watching it, and I'd be like, why is that man turning into a hideous cactus? And he'd explain, oh, well, this is the Quatermass Experiment. And so that was one of my early experiences I've remembered of watching horror at home. And it's sort of quite a good precursor to things like The Fly, because he gets infected by the thing, actually starts to turn into an alien or an insect or an alien, absorbing alien energy, which is sort of the way this film goes, which we'll come to. But it reminded me I had seen that before, and I may have even seen episodes of the John Mills series.
Yeah, because we've got the 1953 original BBC miniseries, which seems to have been playing on some of these post-war post-colonial fears at the time. And that was then adapted by Hammer into a film. And then there was a second mini-series, is that right? The BBC did, which was also adapted into a film by Hammer. That's
right, yeah. So you've got the Quatermass 2, and you've got the Quatermass Experiment and the Quatermass Experiment.
Without the E.
Without the E, just to delineate, just to differentiate, delineate, whatever word you want to use that sounds like either of those words. So I was aware of Quatermass. I was aware that he was a scientist investigating alien anomalies on Earth. So that's all I was really aware of for Quatermass. So when I came to watch this film, I was like, okay, I vaguely know about the character from years of just absorbing films, TV series, clips, people talking about it. Yeah, but I didn't know much about this movie.
I think I'm pretty clear that this was maybe one of the first films that I saw, which my Nana Wiggy allowed me to watch at a very inappropriately young age. Probably I was around 8 when I was allowed to stay up late and watch this on BBC Two in the UK or wherever it was. And it's, I think it was probably one of the first horror Hammer films that I watched that was the non-sort of monster genre films. And obviously at that age, I really didn't get any of the subtext about, I suppose, all of the things that go on in this film, it's got so many different things going on that you get into.
Yeah.
But at that age, it was particularly scary because I just didn't really understand what the hell it was on about, and it was more relatable because it was set in this London
Mm.
that probably when I was watching it in early 1980s was just about relatable from what the world was like then.
Yeah.
So it actually felt like a Hammer horror film was sort of being actually, it was kind of more scary because it was like Hammer horror kind of comes to a town near you or something.
Yeah, it's got that vibe. My word to describe the film, and I'm old enough to not find things really scary. I found the film unsettling.
Yes.
I spent 90 minutes watching it, feeling very unsettled and creeped out, and like it's a nasty, gritty sort of unsettling film, which we can get into, obviously.
It's sort of that sort of social realism creeps in that was kind of getting popular in film, particularly in the UK around the time. But it's that angle as well. I mean, I know that Neil, who wrote it, Nigel Neal.
Mm.
I think there was the Notting Hill race riots that were occurring around this sort of time when he was writing the original scripts for Quatermass. And so this is something that becomes part of the backdrop of the films as well, I think.
That makes sense. Yeah, I could tell it was about civil unrest, and in fact, it's got a lot. It was 1970. This film came out. No, 1967. So it's just before 1970. A few years later, in fact, I think the year after this was Night of the Living Dead, as we discussed last month. But a few years later, there's a film called Deathline, came out in 1972, or Raw Meat, it was also known as, starring Donald Pleasance, and that's about a weird tribe of people living in the London Underground. And it reminded me of that, even though I haven't seen that for a long time. It's on my radar to watch because let's just put it this way, and we'll get into this, is I want to make a film along similar lines to both of those films. So I'm going to write something. But I was very envious of the sets in this film.
Yeah,
They were
it
great.
feels like they've broken off the sets of Bray. It felt as though it was a much bigger world, although most of this thing happens in this underground station, which is supposedly on the Central Line in London. Is it
Yes, it's a
Hobbs End?
fictional Hobbs End in Hobbs Lane, which is fictional. In West, it's West 10, isn't it? I think the postcode, you see a sign. Yeah, and it reminded me of a few things, which I'll bring up instead of mentioning them all at the beginning. It reminded me of a few films, but it did feel like a bit like a zombie film at the end, which I really liked.
Yes. Yes, which is
And
interesting a year after the Plague of the Zombies, which we reviewed last time from
yeah,
Hammer.
yeah, it's not a million miles away from that kind of thing. And also, they filmed this at MGM, the English MGM studios, just up the road from Bray Studios, or just up the road from in Borehamwood, didn't they, Elstree?
Oh, right. Okay. So this is why
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like some of the more kind of chambery pieces
no,
from Bray Studios. Yeah.
no,
Okay.
it's very much not that set for once. It's very much not the big hall with the staircase and the balcony and all that. Even though obviously we're a massive fan of those, it's Bernard Robinson's sets. I mean, they're one of the best. If I had to list the three great things about Hammer movies, I'd probably put set at number 2, because I love them so much. And as I've said, I quite happily live in a house designed by Bernard Robinson. Um, what a great production designer he was and set builder. But yeah, this is just a really good section of the London Underground. And I love there's a line at the beginning, someone hears a noise and it's a train, and they go, "Oh, and don't worry, the trains won't come down here. There's no tracks." Oh yeah, good point.
But they might do, you realize
But they
later
might
in the
do.
film.
Yes. And one of the things I did like was all the moving props. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, aren't we? There's a lot to discuss because I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, me too. And
Yeah.
it seems to be that the BBC, original BBC miniseries back in the 50s was just incredibly popular. I think it was one of the first kind of science fiction-y series that BBC ever shown. And it was just getting something like 10 million viewers each week or something crazy
Wow.
like that. So
Wow.
it was kind of for the people who probably went along to see this film first time round, they knew who Quatermass was and had some sense of the backstory as well. And this is 1967, so we're talking sort of the early days of sort of color science fiction films. And to put it into perspective, this was a £250,000, something like £250,000 movie.
Right.
The year later, 2001 comes out, 30 times the budget.
Phew. Yeah.
And probably is why we don't hear that much about the Quatermass in the Pit anymore, because those sort of big American sci-fi films blew these things out of the water a bit. But it is incredibly ambitious for the budget.
It is, isn't it? I thought you could say the only thing that lets it down is it didn't get enough budget, but that's also part of the charm.
Yeah,
because there are things in it that are, there's the odd gigglesome moment, but it gets you in the end. It gets you. You by the end, you're like, this is relentless and bleak and dark. And even though there's some funny shots of sort of people wobbling around on sets like Star Trek and stuff, it's like, it's not quite as hard hitting as Threads, the 80s British TV series, which scared the living crap out of everybody.
Because it's quite a mood piece. It doesn't, there's no, there's very little comedy. You'd often find in the earlier Hammer monster movies, there was a comedy character who was injected into it, that who would have been recognizable to British audiences. There really isn't any of that in this.
No, and a lot of the horror comes from the sound and the situation. Like, let's go into this weird metal contraption and start drilling a hole. And the reaction they have when they start trying to drill a hole through it is pretty much the reaction I had a couple of weeks ago when I turned on my orange juicer and it hadn't aligned properly.
I remember it was doing this when I was round in your house.
Yeah, were you here? So the teeth started going, yeah, you were here.
That's supposed to sound like that.
No is the answer. So so I saw them and they all pull these faces where they're trying to drill this hole in this impenetrable alien metal. And it's horrific. They do it like 3 times. And Julian Glover, bless him, is in the back as a military guy. It's like going, it's like you just feel like going, just get out of there. This is horrible. You're going to deafen yourself. So a lot of the horror comes from they're all sort of almost chuckling at it. Oh yes, aliens. Monkeys in the walls. And then gradually the horror of it just starts taking over. So it wasn't a horror in terms of, it eventually becomes a kind of they're coming to get you sort of thing, but it was much more sort of body snatchers, actually. It was sort of like, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A sort of a hive mind kind of thing. I didn't expect it to be like that. I thought it was going to be an infection movie, like the Quatermass Experiment, which I think one of the characters just gradually succumbs to the alien's, disease, and he has to fight off the urge to like absorb his wife and stuff, which is horrible.
Well, it's kind of the pacing, because it starts quite slow. You kind of start that there's this extension happening to the central line at Hobbs Lane, so it's that's the starting point. It builds from there, from this simple tube extension to being an archaeological dig, and then suddenly you're into World War II unexploded bombs, and then you're into sort of alien life forms and the missing link, and then spaceships. You've got climate change, ghosts, clairvoyance,
fracking,
telekinesis, then the devil
when was
comes
this made?
in.
The devil,
conspiracy theories. You've got this kind of backdrop of sort of the idea of colonization by a kind of foreign nation and government suppression of information. It all feels kind of quite zeitgeisty living in 2023.
It does actually, doesn't it? There's a lot of stuff in it that, like, there are some things in this 50-year-old film, nearly 60-year-old film, that I've put in some of my scripts recently. But then that's because I'm influenced by a certain, everyone's influenced by a previous generation of movies, and I think so. Nigel Neal, there's things in this that are a bit like War of the Worlds, so it's quite H.G. Wells. There's things in this that are a bit just reminiscent of other stuff where there's things living beneath the earth, and this kind of feels like an update of those 50s things, like I was trying to think of what's the name of The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Oh, yeah.
Those kind of movies where it's like something has come and it's in this big metal thing and it's coming in. Day the Earth Stood Still, it's a benevolent robot who's come to sort of warn But in this, it's just very War of the Worlds. Like there is something buried in the earth, and it's going to come get you. But I did like the way it developed. Like, well, why are there apes down here then? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it
Granted,
kind of leads from one thing to the next, and suddenly you've got this long chain of. I mean, it's a real soup of ideas, and it could have easily been quite a mess. Do you see what I've done there?
Quite a mess experiment.
Quite a mess.
Very good.
But it's actually beautifully structured, I think, and it's acted with real commitment to the story as well, which helps.
It is, and I think like this is the equivalent in this film of modern films going, well, what do you think caused it? Do you think a satellite's been spewing out radiation, or do you think someone got bit, or do you think there's an infected pigeon in a Starbucks or something? It's the thing in modern films do or did, because it's a bit out of fashion now to talk about how these things, like The Last of Us and stuff. It's just like, well, it's just spreading, so we're all screwed. That's enough to know. And it did have that. We'll figure it out. We're scientists. We're men of science, And actually, it's Barbara Shelley's character, Barbara, who who sort of has some key moments in like listen to, like, she's saying she can see it. Listen to her. Put the headset on her. They give it to Quatermass, and he's sat there going, "Oh God, I gotta get out of here." And then Barbara wanders up. They're like, "Yeah, stick it on Barbara. She seems to know what she's doing."
And it's almost like who is one of them possessed? Is that why they're hearing this stuff and others aren't, or is it to do with the bloodline or something from the aliens? Or
which I like they go into later with Dr. Roney and stuff, is that why is he not affected, and why is Quatermass? It's very interesting having Quatermass affected and not the Doctor, because Quatermass is like he's in the title. He's supposed to be the main character, and he nearly turns at the end, which is very good. And Roney has to talk him down, which I thought he was a great character, actually, Dr. Roney.
Both
ends up
Scots,
being the hero,
aren't they?
Yes,
both of those lead actors. So
they
that's
are.
James Donald and Andrew Keir.
Did Andrew Keir hide his Scottish accent for most of the film, and it comes out at the end?
I think Andrew Keir did sound more Scottish, whereas James Donald, he's from Aberdeen. He doesn't sound at all like he's from Aberdeen. So.
No, he sounded very English, didn't he? Sort of, RP sort of thing. But yeah, those two were really good. And I like the fact they're just fumbling over, all the people in authority, apart from Roney, are corrupted by it or freaked out by it. The policeman they talk to down in the, it's the children made those, noises and those scratch marks, and he's absolutely freaked out. Then the guy who goes down, the first guy to come running out, the workman guy, and he's freaked out and just goes completely insane. And it's like, I love that plot of it activating some dormant thing.
Yes.
Which we've all potentially got is good. I mean, I think the idea in the Walking Dead TV series is that you've got the disease. People have got the disease. And if you get bitten or you die, basically, if you die, you're going to turn into a zombie, whether you've been bitten or not, because the disease, every human being has got that disease.
Okay.
So that's the way
it's already implanted, inbuilt in us.
Yeah, I think that's
which is very much the idea here, that there's this kind of line that can be traced back to this visitation to Earth.
That's it, and that reminds me of the Spielberg, which is now nearly 20 years old, War of the Worlds, which is very good, I think. And that they're already here, they've been here, they're under the ground, they're coming up. Whereas obviously in War of the Worlds, they shoot down in comets, which I think they did in the Spielberg one, but they've been here for centuries, And that scene where in War of the Worlds, where it comes out the ground and just plays that horrible, and then just incinerates everybody. That's what Quatermass reminded me of. It's got that sense of something is already here. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers again, they're already here, they're after you.
Or even the Day of the Triffids with a meteorite or something that kind of activates the sort of these Triffid plants on there.
It was very Ray Bradbury. It was very Day of the Triffids. It was very British. That's the thing about British sci-fi. It's so like almost boring in its, the way it's told. Like Day of the Triffids is, let's all go watch the meteor shower. Yes, we're all blind. Oh, look, killer plants,
Yeah.
The way it's dealt with is very, very bleak. British sci-fi writers know how to do bleak
Yes, it's
You know,
and again quite a lot of pretty sort of social commentary as well that happens
yeah,
in this, and in a way it's all explained kind of quite well what's happening
mm,
and why it's happening in a way that something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, like the year later, would be a bit more, leave people to decide for themselves what's happening and what these things
yeah.
they're seeing on screen mean or symbolize.
Well, that's it. With 2001, people still try and explain, oh, what do you think of the ending? Oh, I don't get it. It's like, you're not meant to get it.
Yeah,
It's whatever you think. It's like David Lynch. It's like if you try and join the dots of David Lynch, you will end up somewhere outside the original line, going round and round and round. It's like you're meant to feel stuff during 2001.
yes,
It's meant to provoke emotion about what are we, what am I watching, what am I experiencing. So you come out with your head spinning and you don't go, well, what it's actually about is this and this, because it's about life, the universe, and everything. It's
yeah.
it's about life, death. I mean, they're too big to explain, but this is, yeah, it's unsettling enough, Quatermass and the Pit, to not explain really what's happening, um and
It's
just puts you in.
genuinely quite scary, even with the lack of monsters. And I know we've got these
Yeah,
sorts of models of the aliens and stuff, but
yeah, the terrible locusts with the glittery suits on. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's the cheesy aspect of it, but it's still, for the time, it's, you accept that. You're like, I get it. I get, they did it now, they'd probably be CG creatures, or they'd be like super realistic or whatever. And I think that's sort of beside the point, because the creatures are the very least scary thing about the story. The scary thing is the way people are acting.
yes,
Um,
and
you
obviously
know,
the scariest use of wind machine in any film.
so windy, this film. Yeah, just they had all the wind, didn't they? And yeah, the papers flying everywhere, and um, the last 15 minutes, that last act is absolutely full on. It
Yeah,
definitely doesn't peter out. I spent the last 20 minutes going, this is going for it, right to the end where he's riding the crane down to the
yeah. I
alien.
mean, it's completely mad, but I
Yeah,
mean, I always
mad.
struggled with the third act of films, and
Yeah,
it just tends to peter out for me, and it's very
it does.
rare for me to see a film that I'm really engaged more towards the end, and this one,
Yeah,
yeah, you get this incredible. I mean, it reminds me. I know our other podcast is Tintin. We do our
yeah.
Tintin cast, and there is the scene where Captain Haddock is fighting what's his name with the cranes,
Yes.
Sakharine.
I nearly said Niccolo Sarkozy then. No, not him. Sakharine, yes.
And that
Yeah,
reminded me of the final scene of this.
yes, it reminded me of that as well. Also, there's a scene in the first episode of Doctor Who, the Jodie Whittaker era, where she fights the bad guy on a giant crane, and it was quite ambitious for the first episode of that.
I
But
think this is the first
yeah,
reference ever to Tintin cast from a
yeah, that's, I think it is.
Hammercast,
That's
Hammerheads.
that's a really good, and also it's the fact that the Doctor is like, do you know what, metal, right? If you and Quatermass is like, oh come on, that's way too simple. You
Yeah.
can't just stab it with metal. And it's like, but metal grounds electricity. So, and he's just like, yeah, I'm going to science the shit out of this, and rides a crane into to his own destruction. And I love the last shot is of Barbara and Quatermass just standing there while the titles go up, just absolutely like, well,
I was going to
that's
say
what happened.
that was a very brave kind of final credit sequence, actually, and it felt more like
Yeah.
something you might kind of see on a stage rather than on a film screen.
It did, yeah. But yeah, another film it reminded me of, especially with Barbara, since we're talking about Barbara, the way she was sort of walking through the streets in a trance. First of all, she was dressed like Velma from Scooby Doo, so there's that. But also, it reminded me of Sigourney Weaver in Ghostbusters when she's possessed by Zool, and she's just sort of walking along in a trance and goes up the stairs, and she's got this vacant look in her eye. That's what it reminded me. And I actually thought Barbara Shelley looks a bit like Sigourney Weaver or Faye Dunaway. Basically, they've all got good cheekbones. Um, Barbara Shelley, who apparently had a romantic affair with the director during the film.
Oh,
Yes, he says apparently they were swanning around the set in love. I don't know if that means in love, or if he'd just fallen for his actress, which is,
okay.
a cliche that some directors do. But yeah, the third act is always hard because usually at the script stage, the screenwriters run out of steam.
Yeah.
So you really, this is why all the scripts I write, we really work hard on this third act, because it's like if you're sitting there watching this in a cinema, they'll know if you're flagging, if you've run out of ideas, because the
Yeah.
dialogue won't be there or the action won't be there. No.
I mean, it must
And
have
this
been
definitely doesn't suffer from that.
not at all. I mean, it must have been quite like the Matrix of its day or something like that. I don't know. It's like some sort of
The Matrix. Yeah.
Matrix.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange and uncompromising, kind of
Yes.
unlike many films at the time. It must have been.
It is uncompromising. I can see why it's got a 7 on IMDb, which is a lot higher than a lot of Hammer films that we've watched to date. I think, Dracula obviously is the classic, but it's got a high rating. And I think actually there were bits where they were standing around the pub at the end, the doctor and the professor. And it reminded me of Edgar Wright movies, which I know he was inspired by Night of the Living Dead and Romero and stuff. It reminded me of Shaun of the Dead and World's End, where they're in the pub and there's just chaos going on outside, and the people are all appearing on street corners in unison. And it reminded me of the World's End when the robots or whatever, the aliens, are turning up and in groups and just standing there like, no, you're not going this way, and the camera's a bit like. So I presume Edgar Wright's seen Quatermass from the Pit because he has actually seen every film ever made. So he must know about that one.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and it's sort of Hammer finding its own voice a bit more outside of the, just reprising the Universal monsters.
Yeah. So it's an unusual one because it's almost like its own film. It's like in some ways it does follow the Hammer pattern, but in some ways it doesn't. It's like you would show that film on its own and just go, forget that it's Hammer, because it doesn't have any of the Hammer actors in it. And it's not the same set, it's not anything, but it's made by obviously the same studio. So it's got a lot of the elements in it. So it's a sort of hybrid between those cheesy 50s alien invasion movies and something more visceral and later and primal, and like a Romero or like an Edgar Wright or something like that.
Yeah, I suppose like a Romero, it's the most thematically interesting of the Hammer films to date, because I think it has something to say about the wider society at the time as well.
It does. Plus, I just love that idea of digging deep into the ground and finding something that's already there that you shouldn't disturb. I watched a really good Welsh folk horror that you would really enjoy, actually, called The Feast, the other day. And it's about people who got too greedy and dug too deep and just disturbed the ancient land of Wales, and out of it comes this cursed figure. So that stuff is ancient, that kind of stuff.
I quite like the Choose English Cheese advert on the tube that you see in the background, and I think there's an advert for Johnny Walker as well down in Hobbs End.
Oh, nice! And also there was a poster for The Witches I noticed, which was another production that they were working on.
Oh, right, okay.
Apparently, yeah. I love. I'm not done yet with the whole films this reminds me of. It reminds me of partly randomly Hitchcock's Frenzy, which I think was 1970.
That was his second to last film, was it?
Yes, he'd come back to Angleterre and he was making, and that's just like partly filmed in Covent Garden of the time.
It does feel, I mean, both Frenzy and this feel very much of the time, don't they?
Yeah, it's great. It's just this great film stock. It was Eastman Color or something like that. Great film stock, great sets, great actors with great faces. And actually, did you recognize the blonde lady in the pub who was going, "Oh, Edgar, do you see what's going on out there?" She's in Fawlty Towers. She's in the Waldorf Salad episode.
Oh, right. Excellent.
I complained about my food, and then there was an argument. That one, the one that Bruce Bower ends up defending and saying, "Fawlty, this place is a bunch of crap." So yeah, it was
it's a good trivia.
Yeah, well, she's only been in, as far as in my head, I could only recognize her from that one. She's called Julie Mills or something. I recognized her, and I looked it up, and sure enough, she's Mrs. Johnston, I think.
All right.
In Fawlty Towers, Waldorf Salad.
We've got Julian Glover playing Colonel Breen as well, who's a bit of he's kind of that sort of slightly menacing and annoying character who, in the end, seems to be kneeling in front of his alien overlords. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen to him.
Yeah, do you know what? And then it does that horrible cut back to him out of the blue, and he's like melted, and he falls over. It's like a crash cut. He does no build up to it. You're like, wonder what's happened. Yeah, Julian Glover. He's still going. I think he's in his 90s now. He was in
Yes, he's in For
Game
Your
of
Eyes
Thrones.
Only.
He was For Your Eyes Only, yes, and
Empire
Indiana
Strikes Back,
Jones, Empire Strikes Back, yes.
and many more worthy things of stage and
As
screen,
General
I would have thought.
Veers, yeah, loads of stuff. And I think he described himself as in that film. He said, I'm playing a typical asshole, which is very his
He
sense of
definitely
humor.
is.
He
Definitely
said he
putting
felt
in
too
the
young
time.
to be in it. He was too young for that character, but I thought
Oh,
he was very good. He
no,
does
he's
some
good.
great faces when they're drilling the hole. He's going. In fact, he reminded me. In Monty Python when the Spanish Inquisition sketch and they say sticker in the comfy chair,
Oh,
and it cuts to Terry Gilliam going, "The comfy chair." That's the face Julian Glover was pulling with the drill was going, and he and Quatermass both pulled some amazing faces. Like, oh God, this is
They are
horrible.
totally don't. Yeah, they're really into the whole thing. And
Yeah.
I thought that Andrew Keir as Quatermass, it could have been John Thor. I thought they're very
Yes.
similar actors. I thought like John Thor being Inspector Morse of
Yeah.
UK
The late
crime
great John Thor.
drama.
I thought Andrew Keir. Apparently, Andrew Keir didn't have a good time making this film because he thought the director wanted someone else for the role.
Oh, okay.
But it's one of those cases where the director said, I just thought he was really good, so I left him alone. And he said maybe I should have interfered more
I
because
think he still felt that it was one of the best roles of his career. I mean, apparently
right.
his last acting job in 1996, he reprised the role of Quatermass in the BBC radio series The
No
Quatermass
way.
Memoirs, which was also written by Nigel Neal. So it was the last character he played in a big role.
Oh, I love it when they do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think Barbara Shelley only just died a couple of years ago.
She was in The Gorgon, wasn't she? Which we had a look at
Yes,
a few
she
episodes ago.
was. Yeah, with the rubbery head snakes.
Rubbery head snakes.
So what? Yeah, I love that. Yes, the effects are a bit cheesy, but they're also really good. I mean, yeah, I'm talking about the alien effects. The alien, they were clearly like, made out of papier-mâché, um, and they had little glittery waistcoats on and stuff. But it was quite, everyone was treating them with the appropriate respect. And when
Yes.
they were drilling into the wall, and it was basically obviously green oil paint.
Yes.
Coming out. But then when you think about all of the Hammer horror films, they use red oil paint for blood.
Yeah, that's right. It's
So
just green stock
yeah,
hammer blood, wasn't it?
basically, yeah. So that's the cheesy elements you'd overcome are a few hammy performances, or a few hammy moments like the shaking heads and the oh God, and those aliens. But really, they're such small elements. It's like the Gorgon with the wobbly snakes. It does take your mind out of it slightly, but you're watching a Hammer film, so you're not expecting high quality special effects
Yes.
necessarily. It's about the tone and the mood and a tiny budget.
And Roy Ward Baker as director, who went on to do more Hammer and Amicus stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yes, he did do one for Amicus, didn't he?
yeah, and we should actually on that note, do we have anything to talk about the latest horror rumblings from Hammer Studios and Amicus?
Yeah. So in the last week, actually, of recording this, there's a chap called Laurie Brewster who's a Scotsman who's just relaunched, or he's trying to relaunch Amicus Productions and they're doing a new. So within the first day they went past their Kickstarter fee actually of 60 grand,
cool.
and now they're heading towards 100,000. The idea is to get this first film made. Off the back of that, they start up Amicus Studios again, and he's working with the family of. Is it Sabitsky? The Sabitsky family? It's that kind of sounding. I mean, I'm showing my ignorance here, but he basically is working with them, the daughter or the descendants of the people who originally ran Amicus Productions. So the idea is they want to create Amicus Studios again, 50 years later. And good luck to him, I say. I'll maybe if I tag Laurie in and say, look, we mentioned you on the new episode, you might give it a listen. But well done for getting 100 grand in a couple of days. And it shows you what support that it's got. We love Amicus, even though this is a Hammer web podcast. And Hammer, yeah, I don't quite know who's doing Hammer, but there's a Hammer revival as well. So I really hope, because on the day of recording this, they've just ended the Hollywood writers' strike, and the writers pretty much getting everything they've asked for. Which, as a writer who is working with Hollywood, I'm very happy to hear this, because it's things like, sure, they're not going to use AI instead of humans, and also they're going to pay residuals. They're going to pay fair fees that are in the contract. If the film makes a profit, or the TV show makes a profit, they're going to honor all of that, which is amazing. So I'm hoping, in light of this attitude, that Amicus and Hammer will be able to return to making these low budget, public supported, popular, independent horror films, that aren't dominated by big studios and greed and
CGI
ego and
and
stuff,
that's
CGI.
right.
And I think that's exactly what Laurie is trying to do with Amicus.
And more power to his elbow.
Absolutely, yes. I think it shows a lot of it's a lot of guts. There's a lot of guts in Hammer films. Actually, there aren't that many guts. If you want guts, you want to go watch a Lucio Fulci movie. You'll get maggots and guts. I just bought City of the Living Dead on Blu-ray. That's the kind of mood I'm in this month.
So it's a general thumbs up from us for Quatermass.
This was really good. It was
thumbs
solid.
Up.
Thumbs up. I'd give it I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10 if I was giving it a mark out of 10. Yeah, I think it was very original, but it was like it was an amalgam of what came before, and also sets the tone for what comes after, which is quite a thing to do as a film.
You know what? Full disclosure, I watched the Quatermass Quatermass in the Pit twice. The first time I watched it, I think I was so into sort of I was expecting a certain Hammer film, and I was watching it, and I was thinking, what the hell is this? This isn't Hammer. And then I could have left it a couple of weeks, and then I watched it again and really, really enjoyed it, because I went in without the expectations. So
I do remember you saying a couple of weeks ago, "Oh my God, I've just watched Quatermass in the Pit. That is a strange film. See what you think."
Yeah.
So when I was watching it today, I was thinking, it's not that strange. But you actually rewatched it and liked it.
Yeah, I think I was just going into it with my sort of Hammerhead on, and so if you're watching this one, take your Hammerhead off and put your social realism, alien, non-real. Anyway, some other.
I look, as a filmmaker, if I made anything as good as or anything like the Quatermass in the Pit, I would be very happy. I think it's a very well-made film. Even for the time, it's very well made. But even not for the time, it's good. It's one of those films. It's filled this gap for me. Like, then still we've got, like, next year we've got Night of the Living Dead to come, and then we've got films that came after it that were obviously influenced by it. It's just in this nice little late 60s slot, which just seems to be a real sort of fertile ground for some cool stuff. Speaking of which, Marcus, what have we got next week?
Next week we have The Devil Rides Out.
Now, that one I have seen, and I've seen it recently when I was in Wales, and it was on the telly, and I had to watch it. But I only saw the last hour.
But I remember it being just supreme, and it's a screenplay or adaptation by Dennis Wheatley, and it has the wonderful Charles Gray in it as a Satanist.
Charles Gray.
What's not to love?
Speaking of which, what I'll have to do, and I'll promise to do this next week because we're doing a Charles Gray movie. I'm going to send you, Marcus, the recording that there's a chap in my films on Blogalypse, my zombie film, called Paul Toy, who plays a hapless sound recordist. And when we got our BBFC rating, which is a 15, oh my God, as I'm speaking, a bird of prey has just landed on the roof next to my office, and it looks like a kestrel, and it's a beautiful thing. And I've never seen it up this close. I'm going to try and take a picture, and it's going to fly off, and it's gone. Yeah, I've seen it on the lawn before. It landed next to Edgar once, and he was like, "What the hell was that?"
Wow, that adds a bit of a horror mood to the proceedings. I'm going to vulture on the window.
Just behind my house, there's a tree that gets filled with crows, and at this time of year, it's like Dracula's castle. I will send you a recording of Paul from Zomblog reading out our BBFC certification in what his very Charles Gray-esque voice, where he's going, The film contains mild
Mm.
peril and gore, but he reads it out verbatim from what BBSC did, and he just does it in this great deadpan way. So I'll send you that. You can play it on the next episode.
Lovely stuff. I will look forward to that. Great. Well, enjoy that. I'm sure I will.
Yes, enjoy the episode. Listen to some previous ones if you haven't already, or you're new, just new to this world, or just new to the podcast. Go and listen to some other ones, and go watch the films. They're amazing. And we'll see you next time on Hammerheads.
See you next time. Bye bye.